June 4, 1942. The horizon over Midway et al. Glows faintly with the first hint of dawn. A chill cuts across the coral reefs, carrying the scent of salt and burning fuel. The Pacific is deceptively calm, masking the storm of war about to erupt above its waters. From the deck of USS Enterprise, the low hum of engines vibrates through the steel flight deck. Pilots in leather jackets tighten straps, adjust goggles, and check instruments with deliberate care. The SPD Dauntless dive bombers line up, their wings catching the pale light, while F-4F Wildcats roar, waiting for takeoff. Each man knows what awaits: a fleet of Japanese carriers, their decks bristling with Mitsubishi Zeros and strike formations trained to dominate the skies. High above, clouds shift with the wind, offering fleeting cover. Japanese scouts have been spotted, but exact numbers remain unknown. Every decision, the throttle, the climb, the dive could decide who survives. Pilots grip controls, eyes scanning, hearts steady despite the tension. In that fragile morning light, U.S. fighter squadrons prepare to face an enemy confident in its air superiority, an enemy about to discover that the skies over Midway belong to no one but those who fly with skill, courage, and relentless resolve. The stage is set. The story of intelligence, strategy, and aerial dominance begins here. The Pacific War had erupted less than a year earlier, yet its reach was already staggering. By mid-1942, Japanese forces had surged across Southeast Asia, capturing the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies. Each conquest tightened the noose around Allied supply lines and strategic positions, while projecting an image of invincibility. For the United States, the attack on Pearl Harbor had been catastrophic but not final. Across the Pacific, a fragile but determined fleet struggled to rebuild, repair, and adapt. Every ship repaired, every pilot trained, every sortie flown was a statement of resolve. Naval intelligence played a quiet but decisive role. American cryptographers at Station HYPO in Hawaii had broken significant portions of the Japanese naval code. Analysts could intercept, decode, and anticipate Japanese movements, turning obscured signals into a weapon as potent as any aircraft or artillery shell. For the first time, U.S. commanders could glimpse the enemy's intentions before the Japanese themselves executed them. This advantage would prove critical in the days leading up to Midway. On the Japanese side, the combined fleet was confident. Admiral Yamamoto had orchestrated the attack plan, lure the remaining American carriers into a trap and crush them, securing uncontested dominance across the Pacific. The plan relied on speed, coordination, and surprise a vast armada of carriers, battleships, and support vessels moving like a shadow across the ocean. Yet even the most meticulous planning could not account for the unpredictable variables of weather, terrain, and human decision-making. Air power had become central to modern naval warfare. The battles over the Pacific were no longer fought with slow, lumbering battleships alone, but with agile fighters and dive bombers capable of striking with devastating precision. U.S. aircraft carriers, though fewer in number, carried pilots trained for rapid strikes and dog-fighting maneuvers. The F-4F Wildcat, slower and heavier than the Japanese Zero, relied on tactical discipline and coordinated attacks rather than sheer agility. The SPD Dauntless dive bomber, with its dive brakes and rugged design, could deliver bombs with unmatched accuracy if it reached the target unscathed. Every pilot understood the stakes. Days and nights were consumed with reconnaissance flights, maintenance checks, and endless drills over the open ocean. Engines were tuned, weapons inspected, and tactics reviewed. From the deck of the carriers to the flight line, there was a shared awareness. Any miscalculation could be fatal, not only for the individual pilot but for the entire mission. Geography itself shaped the upcoming conflict. Midway Atoll, a tiny speck of land in the vast Pacific, held immense strategic value. It was the forward anchor for Allied operations in the Central Pacific, a launch point for reconnaissance, and a buffer for Hawaii and the West Coast. Its isolation offered both advantage and peril. defenders could anticipate incoming raids, yet the atoll's remoteness made reinforcements slow and difficult. Japanese planners viewed it as a target that, if captured, would further their control of the Pacific. For the Americans, holding Midway was essential. Its survival meant continued intelligence gathering, operational reach, and a psychological foothold against the Japanese advance. Meanwhile, the human element remained at the forefront. Pilots and crew alike were young, many under 25, yet each carried immense responsibility. Discipline, skill, and courage were tested not in theory but in imminent reality. Mechanically, aircraft were pushed to limits, engines strained against heat and altitude, airframes shuddered under maneuvers, and armaments demanded flawless maintenance. Fatigue and fear were constants, yet a culture of professionalism and collective purpose prevailed. Even the simplest calculations, fuel load, bomb weight, climb rate, could dictate life or death. Japanese formations would arrive in overwhelming numbers, their confidence reinforced by early victories, yet American intelligence, preparation, and meticulous training would counterbalance numerical inferiority. It was not luck that would define the coming engagement, but the fusion of strategy, skill, and courage. From this precarious foundation, the forces prepared for a confrontation that would reverberate across the Pacific. Both sides, confident yet wary, were closing in on a moment where planning, technology, and human will would collide above the skies of Midway. The coming hours would test not only the capabilities of machines and weapons, but the resolve of every man in the air and on deck. The stage was now set for the next layer of the story: strategic concerns, fleet composition, and the rising tension that would lead directly to the encounter of skill, courage, and overwhelming odds. By June 1942, the U.S. Pacific Fleet had begun to transform adversity into opportunity. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, stationed in Pearl Harbor, faced the impossible task of defending a vast ocean with limited resources. Yet intelligence had provided a rare advantage. Japanese communications intercepted and decrypted revealed not just movement, but intent. The Americans now knew the Japanese planned to strike Midway, including the timing of the attack, the composition of their carriers, and the routes their forces would take across the Pacific. This foreknowledge was fragile. A single miscalculation could render it useless, but it offered a glimmer of hope against an enemy who had thus far dominated the theater. American carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown were dispatched to positions northeast of Midway, hidden from reconnaissance. Pilots and crews understood their mission: intercept, engage, and, if necessary, endure. The aircraft carried were a mix of F-4F Wildcats, SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and TBD Devastators. Each aircraft had strengths and limitations. The Wildcat, rugged and armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns, could sustain damage that would cripple lighter Japanese fighters. Dive bombers relied on precision and timing, converting altitude into deadly kinetic energy. Torpedo bombers were vulnerable but capable of decisive strikes if coordinated correctly. Every unit had a role, every movement mattered. On the Japanese side, Admiral Yamamoto's plan relied on coordination and surprise. For fleet carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, supported by cruisers, battleships, and a screen of destroyers, moved with disciplined precision. Pilots had trained for this moment, confident in their superior maneuverability and experience. Intelligence suggested minimal Allied resistance. Yet even their meticulous preparation could not account for American code breakers, the hidden carriers, or the unpredictable variables of weather, fatigue, and timing. Tensions rose as reconnaissance planes scouted the ocean, reporting sightings and positions. Clouds shifted, winds changed direction, and visibility varied across the fleet. For commanders on both sides, every decision was influenced by these variables. Japanese pilots assumed air superiority. American pilots knew survival depended on discipline, altitude, and calculated strikes. On Midway itself, ground crews readied anti-aircraft defenses, stored bombs, and monitored communications. The atoll, though small, became a focal point of global strategy upon whose significance could tilt the balance of power across the Pacific. Morale was fragile yet potent. Young American pilots, many under 25, carried both fear and resolve into the cockpit. They understood that their survival was not guaranteed and that failure meant not just personal death, but the potential collapse of the entire defensive line. For Japanese aviators, confidence had been hard-earned through early victories, yet the psychological weight of extended operations and the vast distances involved added strain. Every sortie, every formation maneuver, every dive or climb was influenced by training, instinct, and split-second decisions. Logistics and preparation were equally critical. American aircraft had undergone meticulous maintenance. Fuel and ammunition were calculated to the ounce. Japanese carriers, operating far from their home bases, faced long supply lines and limited repair opportunities. These subtle differences in efficiency in loading bombs, fuel reserves, engine reliability would have consequences that became decisive within hours. The convergence of fleets, aircraft, and men created a palpable tension over the Pacific. Commanders on both sides balanced intelligence, technology, and human will against chance. The moment of confrontation approached like a rising tide, inevitable and unstoppable. Pilots on American carriers prepared for takeoff, weapons armed, engines humming, eyes scanning the horizon. Japanese scouts advanced, confident, unaware of the trap awaiting them. From this delicate but decisive build-up, every angle strategic, tactical, technological, and human was poised to intersect. The stage was set for the next phase. Angles, where individual perspectives, mechanical capabilities, and tactical doctrines would collide, revealing the extraordinary circumstances of aerial supremacy over Midway. Above the blue expanse of the Pacific, every pilot carried more than an aircraft, they carried responsibility. The young men launching from USS Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown were disciplined, trained, and acutely aware that the outcome of this engagement could alter the course of the war. Some had experienced minor skirmishes. Most had never faced a coordinated carrier strike of this magnitude. Still, their resolve was tempered by preparation. Cockpit instruments, control yokes, and engine vibrations became extensions of their instincts. Every climb, every dive, every tight turn demanded calm under pressure. For Japanese pilots, confidence ran deep. Years of air combat over China and Southeast Asia had honed their skills. They trusted their aircraft, the Mitsubishi Zero, and believed in the supremacy of their tactics. Yet even the most experienced pilot could be caught off guard. The sheer scale of the U.S. carrier operation, combined with unexpected intelligence-driven positioning, created a psychological tension that would ripple across formations. Fear was present, but discipline held it in check. Pilots relied on training, instinct, and the knowledge that a single mistake could be fatal. The human factor, the capacity for rapid decision-making under duress, was as decisive as any aircraft or weapon. In the coming hours, courage and composure would define survival and effectiveness more than numerical advantage. Tactics were the invisible currents guiding every action above Midway. Admiral Spruance and Admiral Fletcher had orchestrated a defensive strategy that leveraged intelligence, altitude, and surprise. U.S. fighters were ordered to intercept enemy formations while dive bombers prepared for precision strikes against carriers. The Wildcat, slower and heavier than the Zero, relied on positioning and teamwork rather than agility. Pilots learned to dive and shoot or cover wings rather than turn inside their adversaries. American strategy emphasized altitude advantage. Climbing above the Japanese formations allowed dive bombers to convert potential energy into devastating speed during attacks. Fighters used coordinated slashing passes to harass and disorient enemy formations. These maneuvers were calculated to exploit Japanese tendencies, overconfidence in maneuvering, a tendency to break formation during pursuit, and reliance on tight coordination for carrier strikes. On the Japanese side, tactical doctrine had long been built around agility and aggressive pursuit. Zeros could outturn any American fighter, and Japanese pilots expected the U.S. aircraft to attempt prolonged dogfights. Yet U.S. doctrine, refined by experience and observation, forced Japanese pilots into unfamiliar vertical engagements and unpredictable attack patterns. The tactical mismatch, in terms of skill application and strategy, would soon manifest in critical moments over Midway. From the Japanese viewpoint, the operation seemed nearly flawless. Scouting planes had reported what appeared to be minimal opposition. Carrier decks were filled, formations intact, and crews confident in their ability to dominate the skies. Their pilots were highly trained, experienced in multiple theaters, and accustomed to early victories that reinforced the notion of invincibility. Yet assumptions can be deadly. Japanese aviators expected to face American forces in predictable patterns, assuming superiority in both numbers and agility. They did not anticipate the U.S. fleet's hidden positioning or the precision of American dive bomber tactics. Their focus on offensive execution created blind spots in situational awareness. Overconfidence, compounded by long distances flown and the pressure of extended operations, introduced subtle vulnerabilities. As both sides approached the critical altitude above Midway, Japanese pilots remained confident but unprepared for the convergence of human discipline, tactical innovation, and intelligence-driven positioning that defined the American response. Their expectations of air superiority were about to be tested in ways they had not encountered in previous campaigns. The combination of human resolve, tactical innovation, and enemy misperception set the stage for decisive aerial engagement. Pilots, aircraft, and doctrines would soon collide over the Pacific, revealing both the limits of confidence and the extraordinary effectiveness of preparation. The Curtiss F-4F Wildcat and the Douglas SBD Dauntless were not the fastest or most agile aircraft in the Pacific, yet they were formidable in the right hands. The Wildcat's rugged design allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy a lighter fighter. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns could shred lightly armored Zeros when pilots fired in disciplined bursts. Precision, coordination, and altitude advantage were its strengths. Dive bombers carried the most lethal potential. The SBD Dauntless, with dive brakes and reinforced airframe, could release 1,000-pound bombs from steep angles with devastating accuracy. Japanese carriers were heavily vulnerable to this method. A single bomb could penetrate flight decks, detonate ordnance, and cripple operational capacity within minutes. For American pilots, understanding their aircraft's limitations and strengths was as critical as their combat training. Engine reliability, armament function, and airframe stress dictated what maneuvers were possible, and pushing these boundaries safely was a skill honed through repetition and discipline. Japanese Zeros were unmatched in agility, but their light construction and lack of armor made them vulnerable to well-timed attacks. The technological contrast, coupled with American tactical planning, created an environment where mechanical advantage intersected with human skill. Pilots who knew their aircraft intimately could turn potential weaknesses into survival and offensive advantage. The Pacific's vastness was both ally and adversary. Cloud layers, sun angles, wind, and sea conditions shaped every encounter. Scouting reports were never perfect. Radar was in its infancy, and reliance on visual spotting meant that timing and positioning were critical. American carriers remained hidden northeast of Midway, their approach concealed by weather and strategic placement. Isolation heightened stakes. Pilots were alone over open water for minutes that felt like hours. Radio communication was intermittent. A single misjudgment could mean separation from formation, fuel depletion, or exposure to concentrated enemy fire. Japanese formations assumed air superiority and did not anticipate American craft descending from unseen altitudes. Every dive, every climb, every evasive maneuver was dictated by environmental factors: wind gusts, cloud cover, and the glint of sunlight off wings and instruments. Even minor shifts could change the outcome. A slight cloud drift could shield a dive bomber's approach or obscure a fighter's line of sight. Pilots constantly recalculated trajectories, adapting to situational variables. The environment was an active participant in the battle, amplifying human decision-making, tactical skill, and technological execution. Leadership defined every maneuver. Admiral Nimitz's strategic patience, Admiral Spruance's cautious yet decisive command, and Admiral Fletcher's coordination of carrier groups created a framework for success. They trusted intelligence, respected pilot expertise, and implemented doctrine emphasizing flexibility, surprise, and precision. Japanese leadership, under Yamamoto, relied on rigorous adherence to preplanned formations and offensive execution. Confidence in doctrine was high, but inflexibility introduced risk. As American pilots leveraged altitude advantage, dive bombing precision, and situational awareness, Japanese commanders struggled to adapt in real time. Pilot autonomy, a cornerstone of American doctrine, allowed individuals to exploit fleeting opportunities. Decisions made in seconds when to dive, when to peel away, when to circle for altitude could alter the balance in a squadron's favor. Leadership at every level, from carrier's bridge to cockpit, intersected with doctrine and tactics to create an environment where prepared and adaptable forces could overcome numeric or perceived technological disadvantages. June 4, 1942. Dawn. The first light reflects off the calm waters surrounding Midway atoll. From hundreds of miles away, Japanese carrier aircraft form dark silhouettes against the horizon. The strike group moves in precise formations, engines roaring, wings clipped with bombs and torpedoes, unaware that U.S. carriers lie hidden northeast of the island. From the deck of USS Enterprise, pilots feel the vibrations through steel and wood as engines warm, fuel lines pressurized, and control surfaces tested. SBD Dauntless dive bombers taxi into position, wings trembling under their payloads. F-4F Wildcats streak into the sky, climbing aggressively, eyes fixed on the distant enemy formation. Each man understands the stakes. Survival, mission success, and the future of the Pacific hinge on precise timing and execution. At 7:15, the first wave of Japanese aircraft nears Midway. The atoll's defenders scramble. Anti-aircraft guns fire intermittently, flak blossoming into white bursts across the sky. American Wildcats intercept, diving through cloud layers to engage Zeros, forcing enemy pilots into evasive maneuvers. The engagement begins in fragmented bursts, small skirmishes among clouds, high-speed passes, and coordinated strikes that test reflexes and resolve. Below, Midway's observation posts report the approaching enemy. Every radar blip and visual sighting is transmitted to carrier decks. U.S. pilots adjust altitude and heading accordingly, maintaining the delicate balance between staying concealed and positioning for attack. The dauntless squadrons climb above the Japanese formations, holding potential energy like coiled springs. Precision and patience are essential. A premature dive or misaligned attack could ruin the strike and leave pilots exposed. Japanese pilots, confident in their training and experience, are taken aback by the aggressive interception patterns. The Wildcats harass the formation from multiple angles, forcing defensive maneuvers. Engines roar, tracers streak across the sky, and every decision is a calculated risk. Smoke begins to rise from the first damaged aircraft, signaling the beginning of chaos in formations once thought invincible. Meanwhile, American dive bombers spot their targets. The carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu are identifiable, their decks bristling with parked aircraft. With synchronized precision, dauntless pilots initiate steep dives from over 15,000 feet. The wind whips across their faces, controls strain under aerodynamic pressure, and bomb release points are measured in seconds. A single miscalculation could send an aircraft into the ocean or expose it to defensive fire. From Japanese carriers, alarm bells ring. Anti-aircraft crews scramble to track diving bombers, but confusion spreads. Smoke, explosions, and the sudden appearance of attacking planes from unexpected directions create disarray. Commanders shout orders, attempting to redirect fighters, but communication delays and the relentless pace of the assault create openings for the Americans. The human element, the discipline and nerve of each pilot becomes as decisive as machinery. Amidst flak and tracer fire, dive bomber pilots hold their courses, release bombs with terrifying accuracy, and climb back into protective airspace. Wildcat pilots continue harassment runs, targeting enemy fighters and creating protective corridors for the bombers. Every maneuver, every decision, is executed under extreme stress, yet cohesion and training allow for devastating efficiency. By mid-morning, cracks appear in the Japanese formation. Smoke rises from the first direct hits on Akagi and Kaga. Pilots realize that their assumed air superiority is not absolute. The clash of intelligence, preparation, and courage manifests in a sequence of precise, coordinated strikes. Japanese pilots, for the first time in the Pacific Campaign, confront the unexpected, a U.S. force perfectly positioned to exploit their weaknesses. The battle is far from over, but the momentum has begun to shift. Every dive, every evasive maneuver, every burst of machine gun fire sets the stage for the next critical phase, the decisive blows that will determine the outcome of the engagement over Midway. By mid-morning, the U.S. dive bombers had achieved altitude superiority. The SBD Dauntless Squadrons, engines screaming and wings taut, began their deadly dives. From 15,000 feet, they plummeted at steep angles, flaps extended, bombs locked, hearts steady despite the chaos below. Every release point was calculated, every second measured, as Japanese carriers bristled with defensive fire. The first bomb struck Akagi. Fire erupted across the flight deck, igniting planes and fuel lines. Smoke poured into the sky, curling like dark serpents, signaling devastation that spread within minutes. Kaga followed, engulfed in flames as bombs penetrated its hangar deck. Soryu, targeted by a second wave, began to burn, unable to recover from multiple hits. Alarmed pilots scrambled, some abandoning ship in parachutes, others circling in disbelief at the destruction wrought from above. Japanese fighters attempted to respond, but the coordinated American wildcat coverage prevented effective interception. Tracer fire streaked between clouds, engines roared, and formations scattered. Zeros, previously unmatched in agility, found themselves outmaneuvered by altitude advantage, disciplined attack patterns, and relentless pressure. Pilots' confidence cracked under the precise, devastating American assault. On the carrier's bridges, commanders shouted frantic orders. Damage reports arrived in fragmented bursts, decks shattered, aircraft destroyed, fuel stores ignited. Yamamoto's plan, executed with meticulous precision for months, unraveled in a matter of minutes. The psychological shock on Japanese pilots and command staff was palpable. They were witnessing a level of coordination, bravery, and precision they had not anticipated. Meanwhile, U.S. pilots executed their recovery procedures, diving and climbing in protective arcs, keeping enemy fighters occupied while their comrades returned to carriers. The American doctrine of coordinated multi-angle strikes had succeeded. For every second that the battle continued, Japanese losses compounded, and their ability to mount effective counterattacks diminished. By late morning, the first wave of Japanese carriers was incapacitated. Smoke and fire marked their decks, and radio silence replaced confident communications. Hiryu, the last operational carrier, attempted a counterstrike, but even its attacks were blunted by the vigilance and positioning of U.S. forces. By noon, the tide had decisively shifted. The Japanese fleet, once dominant in the Pacific, now faced a catastrophic reversal. Pilots and crew aboard American carriers could scarcely believe the effectiveness of their coordinated assault. Every dive, every interception, every maneuver had compounded into a result neither side had anticipated with such speed. The skies over Midway, once assumed to belong to Japan, were now under American control. By evening, the outcome was clear. 3 Japanese carriers were ablaze and irrecoverable. Here you would fall shortly after with further strikes. U.S. forces, though not unscathed, maintained operational strength and morale. The decisive confrontation over Midway had proven that meticulous preparation, disciplined execution, and technological understanding could overcome numerical superiority. The stage was now set for aftermath, the consequences of destruction, the cost in lives and material, and the strategic shift that would ripple through the Pacific theater for months to come. The smoke over Midway lingered long after the final dive bombers returned to their carriers. The water glistened deceptively calm, hiding the wreckage and debris that marked a decisive shift in the Pacific War. Japanese losses were staggering. 3 fleet carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu destroyed, hundreds of aircraft lost, and thousands of sailors killed or stranded. Here you would soon follow, leaving Yamamoto's striking force fractured and demoralized. Reports from the Imperial Japanese Navy described the engagement as a grave setback, a rare acknowledgement of vulnerability in a force accustomed to early victories. For the Americans, the victory was both strategic and psychological. Casualties were significant but manageable. Yorktown had been damaged, some pilots lost, and aircraft destroyed, yet the fleet remained operational, and the morale boost was immense. Sailors and pilots understood that intelligence, preparation, and coordinated execution had turned the tide against an enemy previously deemed invincible. The human element, the courage, composure, and precision of each individual was cited repeatedly in after-action reports. One U.S. pilot recalled, "Every dive felt like threading a needle with the fate of the Pacific in your hands." On Midway, the atoll's defenders witnessed the aftermath firsthand. Burnt-out wreckage floated offshore, and smoke rose from distant flames. For ground personnel, the knowledge that their resilience and support had contributed to this success reinforced the importance of every role in war. Anti-aircraft gunners, radar operators, and mechanics often overlooked were integral to the coordination that allowed dive bombers to strike with precision. The Japanese pilots who survived were forced to confront the reality of defeat. Many described shock and disbelief at the accuracy and coordination of American attacks. Overconfidence had turned to vulnerability. Tactical miscalculations, combined with intelligence oversights, had left them exposed to sustained, lethal engagement. Memoirs and reports from the period underscore the psychological impact. Seasoned aviators, previously dominant in the skies, found themselves struggling to respond to an opponent who had anticipated their every move. Beyond the immediate tactical outcome, the engagement had profound implications. The loss of experienced air crews and carriers significantly weakened Japan's offensive capacity. Plans to expand control across the Central Pacific were curtailed. U.S. forces, conversely, gained not only a decisive victory, but also the confidence to undertake further operations in the theater. The battlefield itself became a somber witness to human sacrifice. Smoke, fire, and burning wreckage were reminders that victory carried a cost. Strategic brilliance was inseparable from courage under fire. The aerial choreography above Midway, meticulously planned and executed, had destroyed the illusion of Japanese invincibility and set a precedent for how intelligence and preparation could redefine engagements in modern naval warfare. The implications of Midway extended far beyond the immediate destruction of Japanese carriers. Strategically, the battle marked a turning point in the Pacific War. The Japanese Navy, previously dominant, lost both material and morale. Their ability to project power into the Central Pacific was sharply curtailed, forcing a defensive posture that would shape subsequent campaigns at Guadalcanal. The Solomons, and beyond, U.S. commanders, emboldened by their success, began to refine carrier-based doctrine, emphasizing coordination, intelligence exploitation, and tactical flexibility lessons drawn directly from the engagement over Midway. Technology and innovation were validated in the crucible of combat. American dive bombers demonstrated the lethality of precision strikes, while radar and code breaking had proven their value as force multipliers. Aircraft carriers emerged not merely as platforms for planes, but as decisive instruments capable of shifting the balance of power. The integration of intelligence, situational awareness, and tactical execution became a model for future operations, influencing naval doctrine for decades to come. The human consequences were equally profound. Japanese pilots and crew faced the psychological aftermath of catastrophic loss. Accounts describe disbelief and shock as carriers burned, friends were lost, and years of training were rendered ineffective in minutes. For U.S. pilots, victory brought a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and renewed determination. Survivors understood that skill, preparation, and timing, not luck, had secured success, reinforcing confidence in training and leadership. The broader diplomatic and military landscape shifted as well. Allied nations, previously cautious, now saw the U.S. Navy as a credible counterforce to Japanese expansion. Propaganda, reports, and communications emphasized the tactical brilliance and valor demonstrated at Midway, inspiring not only American forces but also Allied allies across the globe. Conversely, Japanese command faced internal reassessment. Losses at Midway forced changes in operational planning, pilot training, and fleet composition. Yamamoto's ambitious expansion strategy was effectively halted, revealing vulnerabilities that would be exploited in later battles. In retrospect, the Battle of Midway revealed the fragile balance between preparation and hubris, between technological innovation and human adaptability. The loss of carriers and aircrew had immediate operational consequences, but the strategic ramifications resonated throughout the Pacific theater. The battle became a template for modern naval aviation, illustrating how intelligence, tactical ingenuity, and disciplined execution could overcome superior numbers and assume dominance. By nightfall, the smoke over the Pacific had begun to dissipate, but the reverberations of the day were only beginning to be understood. The U.S. Navy had not only survived, but had struck a decisive blow, demonstrating that control of the skies could determine the fate of fleets and the course of war. The aftermath of Midway, in both material and psychological terms, set the stage for the relentless, multi-year struggle that would define the Pacific War. The Battle of Midway stands a testament to the intersection of intelligence, preparation, and courage. In the span of a single day, the tide of the Pacific War shifted, not through overwhelming numbers alone, but through meticulous planning, disciplined execution, and the resolve of individuals operating under extraordinary pressure. The young pilots who climbed into their Wildcats and dauntless dive bombers exemplified a rare combination of skill and composure, turning potential vulnerability into decisive advantage. Beyond the tactical and strategic outcomes, Midway reveals the profound role of human judgment in war. Machinery and technology are only as effective as those who operate them. Precision, timing, and coordination amplify their impact. American code breakers, working quietly in the background, created opportunities that transformed risk into advantage. Commanders, balancing caution with boldness, leveraged intelligence and initiative to orchestrate a victory that reshaped the theater. For the Japanese, the battle was a stark reminder of the limits of confidence and the cost of underestimating an opponent. Even a force perceived as invincible can falter when confronted with disciplined, adaptable, and prepared adversaries. Midway highlights the interplay between hubris and foresight, showing how strategy and human resilience converge in moments that determine the fate of nations. Ultimately, the skies over Midway were more than a battleground. They were a proving ground for the principles of modern naval warfare. The lessons about intelligence, coordination, technology, and human courage resonate far beyond the Pacific, offering insight into leadership, decision-making, and the enduring realities of conflict. In the calm after the battle, as smoke drifted across the horizon and survivors reflected on the day's events, it became clear the measure of war is not only in destruction, but in the skill, foresight, and resilience that define those who shape its course. The story of Midway is a reminder that even against formidable odds, preparation, courage, and insight can transform uncertainty into victory, and that every moment of decision, every action taken under pressure, carries the weight of history itself.